Well, thank you. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you all for being here and being part of the CoC's Advocacy Committee. I'm happy that you're here. We have a good agenda we're not too packed, so we should be able to have thoughtful discussions and not feel rushed through things. And we're fortunate to have a lobbyist here to present to us some information about the upcoming legislative session. So I want to welcome you all. You have access to the consent agenda, and hopefully you had a moment to read through that. It was way back in August, I think it was. But if there are no changes, I'd like a motion to approve that consent agenda.
Kathleen, there was one change. I sent Megan that I was an attendee to that event and I wasn't listed as an attendee.
Okay, you were, but you were not listed. I know
Yeah.
you were mentioned in the notes.
I know. So I said it was there.
I did make that update, Leah, for the
Okay.
packet being shared today. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, great. All right, so do we have a motion to approve with that amended change?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion by Anne-Marie and a second. Are we all in favor of that? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we've got our minutes, our consent agenda, and our minutes are approved. All right, let's take a look at the proposed meeting dates. Does anyone have problem with those? Are we okay with those? And again, they're all virtual. And if so, do I have a motion to approve those meeting dates?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor of keeping those meeting dates? So we have today, May 5th, August 4th, and November 3rd, virtual. All those in favor, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Great. It's a little hard when we have a split screen. I can't see everybody, but we're doing okay. All right, we had some proposed changes to the wording in our brochure. One was from a lived experience advisory committee member, Jennifer, who I don't think is on. Jennifer might be on here. Jennifer Heathcock, I don't think so. But to change the word stakeholders to community members, and I think we're okay with that. And then the other change is diversity, equity, and inclusion to systems disparities and inequities task force. Do you want to take those wording changes individually or as a group, the two of them? Why don't we do them individually, just to be clear? Okay, do I have a motion to change the wording from stakeholders to community members?
So
And
moved.
so moved, okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay.
With
Do you want
discussion.
for discussion? Okay. All right. How about Megan or Victoria, if you were part of that leak committee, since I don't think Jennifer's on our meeting right now, but Gary's here. Anyone want to comment on a little more on that wording change from stakeholders to community members?
This is Victoria Kelly. I'm happy to do that. So it was proposed that we change at the very beginning at the top where it says the Pinellas CoC is a diverse group of community members with a shared vision of making homelessness rare, brief, and a one-time experience. This previously said the Pinellas CoC is a diverse group of stakeholders with a shared vision of making homelessness rare, brief, and a one-time experience. The request was made to change that from stakeholders to community members, just to make it a little bit more accessible for the public. So we went ahead and made that change. And then, of course, because the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is no longer called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, that language was changed to update their new name as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I understand why that's being made. So I do agree with that. I do think the word stakeholder, however, has a little bit more gravitas in the sense that a stakeholder has a stake. They have ownership in the issue, as opposed to a community member who literally could be anybody. But I appreciate the reasoning behind the word change, and I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Any further discussion on either name change? Okay. All right. Let's take a vote. All those in favor of changing stakeholders to community members, say aye.
Bye.
Aye. Or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, great. And then we will change, we do need to change because we've changed the name of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion to Systems Disparities and Inequities Task Force. And is there any comment on that? Any questions or clarifications needed for that? Okay, do I have a motion to approve that?
I think we had the motion in the
Or
second.
both? Okay, all right, motion in a second. All right, then all those in favor? Say
Aye.
aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Then we've got those two kind of bookkeeping or bookkeeping things taken care of. Thank you. All right. Our agenda item 4 is our Florida Coalition to End Homelessness 2025 priorities. And this will be presented by Mr. Brian Cherry. Anne-Marie or Victoria, would you like to introduce Mr. Cherry?
Sure. It's Victoria Kelly again. I am more than happy to introduce Mr. Brian Cherry, who serves as lobbyist for the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness and has agreed to be here with us today to discuss the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness's advocacy priorities for this year.
Great. Well, thank you, Victoria, and thank you, everyone. Pretty much summed it up. So I am the lead lobbyist and advocate in Tallahassee on behalf of the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness. Have been now going on about 10 years. So we've worked very hard as an organization to build awareness with legislatures as well as state agencies on the face of homelessness and how that's changed over time. Many in the legislature years ago, when we first started out together, envisioned homelessness as a typical panhandler on the side of the road asking for food or for money. And we've shown them through data and statistics that we have, the face of homelessness, certainly when COVID hit, that shined a light on it as well. But it's single mothers with children. It is people living paycheck to paycheck, and with one adversity, they could find themselves homeless. So we've worked very hard to shape what that image is, what it truly means to be homeless, what services there are that are provided that the state can provide, the services that the state draws down through the continuum of care lead agencies from the federal government, which is where the bulk of the funding comes from. But there are two primary grants in the state budget that the continuum of care lead agencies rely on when it comes to state funding in particular to be able to draw down the $130 million annually from the federal government. So I did prepare a PowerPoint. I think I need to be given the controls to share my screen.
You should be able to share, Brian.
Okay. Oh, there we go. I see that now. Let me go here real quick. All right. and we will go from the beginning. So again, we started out, and hopefully you can see that on your screen now. We started out 10 years ago, and we talked about the buckets of funding from the state. This is state general revenue that comes from the state of Florida. And the homeless staffing grant was receiving $0 recurring in the budget. The homeless challenge grant was receiving $0 recurring in the budget. So, for those of you not aware of recurring versus non-recurring, it's exactly as it sounds. So, if it's recurring, that's in the state budget. It would actually take an act by the legislature to cut the funding. If it's non-recurring, that means that's a 1 year appropriation, and each year you have to come back and plead your case and ask for it to be included in the budget. So in good budget years, as we've seen over the past 3, 4, 5 years, we've certainly had to plead our case, don't cut our funding, but it hasn't been an argument really with the legislature because we've been in such good budget times. So since 2013-14, we have increased the homeless staffing grant and the challenge grant from $0 recurring in the budget to now 5.2 million for the staffing grant recurring and 20 million recurring for the homeless challenge grant. So those are our babies, if you will. We hold on to them, and we don't want anybody to cut them, of course, and that'll certainly be our advocacy this year. And I'll get in just a moment and explain why this year is going to be a very difficult budget year. So those are two items you will see on the coalition's priority list every year. Are those two funding items. We have another one this year. There was an additional $10 million that the legislator appropriated for the challenge grant. Now, this was specific to unsheltered individuals. Now, the legislature appropriated this funding as non-recurring. So that means we have to come back this year and say, please include it in the budget again. But it was directly tied to House Bill 1365, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with as it relates to public camping and sleeping bill that was passed by the legislature and went into effect in October of this year. So that is on our list this year to make it as recurring. With those funds, DCF did not contract with the CoCs until very late. In fact, I think it was a month or two ago that you all went under contract for those funds. And so what we're asking for the legislature to provide is any unspent balance of funds from the $10 million for the unsheltered specifically to reappropriate for the next fiscal year. So what that means is it will allow you all for any unspent dollars from those unsheltered challenge grant funds to be able to spend that in the 25-26 fiscal year. Again, this is something the legislature will have to approve, and they'll include it what they refer to as back of the bill language, which will be in the back of the appropriations bill to revert and reappropriate any unexpended balance of funds. So DCF did include that in their legislative budget request, and we'll be asking the legislature to do that as well. Similar to the recurring staffing and challenge grant, coalition priority is we're going to always have on our list is the trust fund monies, that ship and sale program. And our advocacy has been to use all of the funds that's available in those housing trust funds for their intended purposes. So no sweeps. There was a big housing bill from a couple of years ago, which appropriates for a decade $150 million in general revenue into the sale program. So our talking points have shifted a little bit. Instead of don't sweep, to use them for their intended purposes, right? Of the regular sale funds. And of course, we monitor, we advocate, if necessary, for or against all homeless related legislation, any affordable housing legislation or amendments that are filed. Last year, as an organization, we passed a persons with lived experience legislation, which dealt with background screening and some of the items that would serve as obstacles for persons with lived experience being able to be employed by your CoC or other providers under your umbrella. And so that was a big win for the coalition. This year, we don't have a bill per se that we're running or going to file. We're going to be more actively involved in legislation that is filed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment as we get through the slide of what legislation we expect to see coming up for the 25 legislative session. So the recurring staffing grant, I mentioned, in good budget years, this is a item that we certainly meet with members. We explain the importance of it because we want them to be aware of this staffing grant. Many of the members that come into the legislature don't know the first thing about homelessness, and they certainly don't know where in the budget your programs are receiving the staffing grant from. Why it's especially important this year to have that conversation. Florida is constitutionally required to do what they refer to as a 3-year budget outlook. And Florida's 3-year budget outlook, which is decided by the state economist, they'll meet again in March to do an update to their previous update, but they're showing about a $7 billion budget deficit to the state overall budget. So what that means is the state is spending more than they are projected, and I want to highlight projected to bring in tax revenue over the next 3 years. So the legislature will be tackling this budget deficit over the next 3 years, starting this year. They don't want to wait and just do it 3 years from now. They want to start taking small bites at the apple. So what does that mean for the homeless staffing grant? Well, that means all budget items that are funded in the base budget as recurring will be scrutinized. What is the return on investment? Why are we funding these programs? Who's receiving the programs? What are they doing with these funds? And so, in fact, I just left the Capitol a few minutes ago, meeting with the Senate budget chair over Senate appropriations, discussing just this very item, the return on investment, the $130 million that are drawn down annually by the continuing care lead agencies to the state. And without the CoC system in place here in Florida, those dollars simply would not be available. Generally, very good reception so far by those who understand your program and those who are just learning more and more about the staffing grant and your program. But that will be a key theme for this session is the legislator will be looking at where can we make cuts to our budget so that we can make up the $7 billion shortfall. Now, I will say it's projected. That's why I highlighted that earlier, a projected shortfall. Our revenues have actually been exceeding what was projected. So Florida is a very tourism-driven state. Sales tax revenue is our source of revenue, and our tourism numbers have exceeded expectations. Therefore, we brought more into the state. Our economy overall has been doing very well, and so there's been a lot of spending, so a lot of sales tax revenue collected. So we continue to beat the projections. That certainly hasn't made up $7 billion worth. Couple $100 million here or there, but you add that up over time, that certainly helps close that deficit just a little bit. I'm often asked when we talk about the budget deficit, well, what's led to the budget deficit? And there are many factors that are involved with that. One, American Rescue Plan Act funding is going away, right? Or has gone away. The ARPA funds that the federal government appropriated. And so the state of Florida, like all the other states, use that to supplement funding. So with that gone, that creates a bit of a shortfall. Florida has taken on and tackled some very, very heavy initiatives over the past couple of years. Last year or 2 years ago, there was a school voucher program that came at an expense, about $700 million to $1 billion for the school voucher program. There was an affordable housing bill over a decade that's going to be $1 billion. There have been recurring tax cuts um, to our budget, and so all of those things add up to less revenue that you're taking in as a state. Now, many will argue, and I'd probably agree with most of these things. Some of these initiatives that they've taken have absolutely been necessary. Affordable housing, everyone knows that's a critical issue. We need to fund that as a state. Some of the tax cuts, we're likely to see that on the back end, right? As their tax cuts, people and businesses are likely to spend, so we'll see that in sales tax revenue. Just kind of a high level overview of the budget deficit, what that means to items in the recurring base budget, like the staffing grant and like the challenge grant. So the recurring $20 million that's in the state budget today, we'll be having the same conversations and have been having with our legislators on the importance of the staffing grant. So priority for this year, the 10 million that we saw for unsheltered individuals that was appropriated last year is non-recurring. Our request this year is for the legislature to make that recurring. So rather than $20 million recurring for the challenge grant, we'll have 30 million, 10 of which will be for unsheltered specifically. Where this item ends up at the end of the budget process, which will be in May, we start session in March and we close in May, remains to be seen. Obviously, with a tough budget year, getting and adding an additional $10 million to the base budget will be difficult. But just a little context where this 10 million came from. I mentioned earlier House Bill 1365. Originally, the legislature was looking at the $20 million challenge grant as a source for unsheltered. And in a budget bill, language that accompanies an appropriation is called proviso language. Well, the proviso language that first dropped during the budget process last year was for the unsheltered portion of the challenge grant to all come from the 20 million. So that would dilute what the original intent of the statute, the challenge grant statute was, which of course is for housing or program services needs or anything falling within your continuum of care plan. And so we asked the legislature, we said, please don't dilute the challenge grant. It's doing amazing things. We've got a lot of good projects. The CoCs are, become accustomed to this funding becoming available now that's recurring. So if you're going to do that, handle it separately. And so that's what they did with the 10 million. That's where that came from. We'd like to see the 10 million stay, of course. But I'd say our number one goal here, protect that 20 million for its original purposes. And so that will be our approach heading into this session. If you want to add proviso, make sure you include the 10 million for the unsheltered. Don't take it from the 20. Went over this one earlier. This is the revert and reappropriate the unexpended balance of funds from that 10 million unsheltered. Given the timing of the contract execution, we believe it's certainly necessary. DCF agrees it's necessary. This would allow spending for that 10 million to cross fiscal years. It is something that is common with grants. And hopefully if the 10 million is appropriated again this year, we'll be able to get those executed much sooner than it was this year. But that's the intent of this. That will be included in the back of the bill, something that will happen in the very end of the appropriation process, but will allow you all to cross fiscal years with that funding. Mentioned earlier, our Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars, ship and sale. And so here's what's available this year for ship and sale. We've got a total of $406 million between the programs. You see there the Live Local recurring funding. That was the $150 million in general revenue that came from Senate Bill 2 a couple of years ago, which was a Senate President priority at the time. And I've broken down what that looks like from a funding perspective for Pinellas County um, and the cities within of what that would look like today. Again, this is current or what is projected by the state economists to be in the affordable housing trust funds when the legislature makes their final appropriations. This could increase or decrease, but not significantly. This is pretty much what we're looking at this year. And again, our advocacy as an organization is that these funds are used for their intended purposes. All right. Monitor, advocate legislation. There are bills filed all the time. We that are either from organizations like ours or those under our umbrella or those who, we don't agree with. So we're monitoring that all the time. I've already got a list of different tenant landlord bills, for example, that I'm looking at. There's some other bills that have been filed. Again, we're just in the very beginning phases of preparation for session, so we expect to see a lot of legislation filed. One that we have not seen filed yet is a follow-up to House Bill 1365, the homelessness encampment bill. Now, I will say, and I included a blurb here from Governor DeSantis. He did hint at possibly going in and strengthening that language a little bit. I think he referred to it. I put here as stricter enforcement. Uh, Given what the Supreme Court's decision was in Grants Pass versus Johnson, which many of you may be familiar with already, but it pretty much affirmed local restrictions, allowing the local restrictions on sleeping in encampments. So the governor has at least come out and said, hey, looks like we could maybe do more here. I don't know at this time what the legislature's appetite is going to be for that, whether they'll just leave it as it is, whether they make some tweaks that are actually tweaks that we could support. But I would not be surprised if we do see some type of legislation this year as a follow-up to that bill, making some tweaks. I know cities and counties have been actively involved in that conversation, as well as other organizations. So we'll keep that certainly at the forefront as we move here through session and see if a bill is filed and where we need to position ourselves based on the legislation. I've also been told to expect an affordable housing bill of some sort. What that looks like right now, to be determined. I know in years past, I'd mentioned the Live Local bill that was really focused on workforce and ensuring that our first responders, for example, could live in the communities in which they serve, and teachers. Was another example in law enforcement, EMS, etc. What this year's affordable housing bill will focus on, again, to be determined as I have here. But I do expect and have been told there is one coming. And trust me, I'm eagerly trying to get my hands on that draft so I can ensure vulnerable populations like the ones you all serve are treated fairly in that bill. So certainly something that I'll be reporting out through the coalition as these bills are filed and where we can position ourselves moving forward. All right. That's kind of a high level overview of what the coalition is focused on this year. Leanne is the executive director for the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness. I've included her email there. And I'm, of course, Brian with Pinpoint, and my email's on there as well. But happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. I may be ignorant, but of the $20 million recurring grant challenge funding versus the 10 million non-recurring, which was strictly designated for unsheltered individuals. So going back to the 20 million, is there no money there for unsheltered, or what does that just go for? like I said, what does that go for? I guess I'm trying to differentiate the 20 from the 10.
Yeah, so and there are others here probably on this call that they can answer specifically how it's being used
Okay.
in Pinellas. Um, the challenge grant, the 20 million, the recurring, that those funds can be used for any program needs, service needs, or anything in the continuum of care plan.
Okay.
So the intent of the challenge grant is to be flexible, right? To have flexible funding to solve,
Okay.
fill the gaps, if you will, where there's either to supplement um, funding that you're receiving maybe from the federal government or to fill an area where you don't have funding. The 10 million, as you said, that was unsheltered individuals. It didn't explicitly say encampments and say build an encampment with this. But it did say unsheltered, so anything unsheltered related.
Thank you. That's clear.
Certainly.
Thank you. Anne Marie.
Thanks. Brian, thank you so much. This was really, really helpful. Would you mind
Absolutely.
stop sharing? So
Yep.
thanks. Okay. So I have a couple of questions, but I don't want to hog up the questions. So the governor's budget dropped last night. Was there anything in there that we should be aware of, specifically related to the population that the CoC serves?
Yep, absolutely. And a good point. I just didn't have a slide on that yet because it dropped at about 10:56 p.m. last night.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so I can do a quick highlight. So the 20 million for the challenge grant recurring was included in the governor's budget recommendations. The $5.2 million recurring for the staffing grant was included in the governor's recommendations. Um, all of the affordable housing ship and sale dollars that is available were used in the governor's budget recommendation for their intended purposes. So that was a very good one. We did not see the revert and reappropriate language for the 10 million unsheltered in the governor's recommendations. I've actually talked with DCF about that, and they think that that was actually an error and it should have been included because it was actually in DCF's LBR. So they're working to verify that on their end. I'm actually meeting with DCF's Legislative Affairs Director on Thursday to hopefully clear that up. But from a coalition perspective, we like the governor's budget recommendations. We may not like legislation that he pushes on House Bill 1365, or we may if he does. But from a budget perspective, yes, it was a very kind budget to the coalition.
Right. So has the coalition put out like a legislative priorities document
Yes.
that the CoC and the HLA could consider turning into a letter that we would send to our entire delegation? There is.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
have a one pager that we create every year, and it gives a blurb about who the coalition is, what the makeup of that coalition is, and what the legislative priorities are. So I'm happy to share that as well.
Yeah, and then we could discuss later if that's something we wanted to do. And then my last question is, are there any members, legislative members from Pinellas County that are on any committees that we need to be aware of? So DCF or PROPS or wherever this funding lives. Thank you.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. Thank you for them. I have a list I can pull up, but I'll share it. But I can tell you, and I just left meeting with him, is Senator Hooper, who is the Appropriations Chairman in the Senate. He represents Pinellas and Pasco. And
Yes.
so that's a very good member to have for the next 2 years, given his geography and his district. So that would certainly be one. There are more than just him, but that'll be another list I'm happy to share.
Yeah, because I think any advocacy we might want to do would be tailored to those folks that are on those committees because they have input and I know Senator Hooper really well, and probably a lot of people on this call do as well. So that's good news.
He's a good man.
Yes, thank you very much. Hard to get a meeting with, but yes.
Yeah, busy man. Yeah, there are
Yes.
a lot of people knocking on
Yes.
his doors,
Yes.
certainly these days, given his position. So, for those of you not familiar with the leadership um, org chart there in the Senate, so every 2 years you get a new Senate president, and you'll have the Senate president, you'll have the majority leader, and you have different chairmen and women on various committees. Probably, well, certainly from an appropriations perspective, the most important member, chair, is the appropriations chair, and that is Senator Hooper, and he is your senator.
Fantastic. Thank you. Your presentation has been really, really informative, Mr. Cherry. Thank you. Do I have any other questions before I go through a couple of mine? I'm not seeing hands, but Victoria, if you can confirm that there aren't other hands? There are other hands? Mr. Cherry, I had a couple on, so I mean, just to be clear, and I know everybody talks, but so you're saying that way up at the beginning that the legislature is, well, let me go down, is claiming about a $7 billion deficit. But I mean, DeSantis last year said he's flush with money. We've got so much money. I've got the best budget ever. I mean, it's amazing that they're coming back with a $7 million deficit to start the session.
Yeah,
I mean, is it for hurricanes, or I know ARPA funds went away. You mentioned that.
Yeah, no, I mean, fair question, good question. And it would sound a little confusing, especially, in the governor's budget, he puts away $4 billion in savings. So, it's not an accurate statement to say the state's economy is healthy, but I understand how you say, how do we have a $7 billion budget deficit? And I think it's important to understand that that's over 3 years. Okay, so actually, if you looked at this coming fiscal year, we actually have about $1 billion surplus. But when you add that to the second and third year out, so the 26, 27, 27, 28 fiscal years, that's when the budget deficit comes. So what they're trying to do is start tackling that this year, even though we're in a surplus year for the out year deficit, if that makes sense. I had mentioned some of the big initiatives that have contributed to that. We've had a couple of $1 billion worth of tax cuts. That's less revenue now coming into the state. Those are recurring tax cuts.
Yes.
Now the thought there is, well, we'll see that on the back end, so it might neutralize each other. We'll see. We've had the school voucher program. It's anywhere from $700 million to $1 billion annually. That's now we're committed to funding. Huge affordable housing initiatives, $1 billion over 10 years. So really the tax cuts and some of the big initiatives we've seen is what's contributing to that. That with a bit of a slowing in tourism, although it's what's projected, right? We've seen our tourism numbers continue to outpace what's been projected, and therefore our revenue collections have continued to outpace what is projected. And this is really a national trend that we're seeing, a bit of a slow in the overall economy. And Florida's certainly not immune to that, and certainly not immune to that, given that that's how we generate revenues through sales tax.
Okay, thank you. I know that you talked about reappropriating any unspent challenge grant funds, and that language wasn't in there, but you think it will be. So we have unspent challenge grant funds that we need to get spent. I mean, I just think we're in a crisis. It needs to happen sooner rather than later. I mean, certainly we don't want to lose those, and we want to show that they can be spent quickly because our need is so great. So, are you pretty confident that, I think we should be able to spend those and have those encumbered and spent by June. Is it June or July? When is that deadline?
Yeah, June 30. July 1's a new fiscal year. And I just want to clarify the revert and reappropriate language was specific to the 10 million unsheltered. So
Mhm.
there were two
Right.
separate challenge grant. There was the 20. So we're not talking about the 20. Those funds need to be spent by June 30th.
Mhm.
What we're talking about is the $10 million. Any award that Pinellas received from that 10 million pot, that is what we are hopeful that we can get to reappropriate into the next fiscal year. The issue with that is, well, session doesn't end until May 2nd.
Right.
So you have to operate as if you need to spend by June 30,
Absolutely.
with the hope that we'll have the next fiscal to get those dollars spent.
Sure. But I think our argument would be stronger if we had already spent, if we're spending those, we need you to keep them because we can't get them out the door fast enough or.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt. You want to show that we are spending, right? Because you don't want DCF to look at that and think that they can go recapture funds and maybe shift it to another right COC
Yeah.
that maybe can burn those dollars quicker. But we also have the argument from the fact that these contracts were just recently executed, and we're what? They were executed in January, I believe. Is that correct?
No, I think it was before that. I think
December?
it was in December.
Okay. So, I mean, you had from June to December. My biggest question is why weren't those executed before? And that's really on DCF. And I think that's why DCF was so willing to include that in their legislative budget request because they knew that was, it wasn't acceptable to be executing contracts that late. And again, DCF's been a partner with this, so I don't want to throw them under the bus, but for whatever reason, they did not get executed till they did.
I had a conversation with our municipal planning agency, Forward Pinellas, and that director was saying there's an ADU bill that's being filed. Are you familiar with that, or do you support that? Do you know anything about
I
it?
haven't seen it filed, and I
Okay.
haven't seen a draft. So,
Okay. Okay.
again, not aware of it, but
Okay.
something that once it's filed or someone shares a draft with me, happy to take a look at it.
Okay. And then is there I know that Anne Marie talked about what committees these pieces of legislation would go to first. Is there a flow chart of what committees it goes to first or what committee it gets introduced into first?
So it depends. If we're talking appropriations, the staffing grant and challenge grant will be funded out of the Children and Families or Human Services Committee. They renamed it in the House this year. Budget subcommittee, with the full appropriations and full budget committee having final authority over their subcommittee, because they handle DCF's budget and that's where those dollars flow through. The Transportation Economic Development Committee has Florida Housing Finance Corporation under their budget purview. And so they would handle the affordable housing dollars, the SHIP and the sale funds. Now, if it's a piece of legislation that's filed, now we're talking entirely different. It depends on what statute is being amended or created, where that falls. So it then is referred to committees, and typically substantive legislation is going to be referred to 3 different committees before it'll have a final vote on the House or Senate floor.
And I think the last question, I'll just scan and see if anybody else has questions, but when we advocate for don't appropriate the funding for anything else, keep the funding, at least, keep it there. It's my understanding that about 5 or 6 years ago, the legislature carved out a third of the Sadowski fund, 2/3 of the Sadowski funds for other things. And now they're saying they're fully funding the Sadowski fund, but it's really at a third of the level. Is that what you mean by let's maintain it at a third? Or you're not asking for it to go back to the original Sadowski fund, doc stamp, all that? Is that
Well,
correct?
I think what you're referring to is there was a trend, not a good trend, of the legislature sweeping So taking dollars from the trust fund and shifting those dollars to general revenue to fund other initiatives. We have not seen that now in 3 consecutive years. All of the dollars that are coming to that trust fund are being used for ship or sale. What we've seen actually is an infusion into the trust fund of $150 million of general revenue. And that was part of the Live Local legislation that was spearheaded by former Senate President Kathleen Passidomo from Naples. That was her big initiative with making expediting affordable housing units for the first responders and so forth.
But when you say it hasn't been swept, you mean after they permanently carved out, correct?
So I'm not aware of anything that's been permanently carved out. I mean, there's been a list of how the dollars are to be distributed, what programs or organizations receive the funding over those funds. But I have not seen a huge carve out. What we've seen are quite large sweeps, and we have not seen that in some time.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly.
Anybody else have a question? If you can. So do I see anybody else?
Sam has his
Okay, great.
hand
Thank
up.
you. Thanks. Sam, go ahead.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, I'm curious if there are other COCs that have sort of structured advocacy interventions like we're trying to do here, and particularly thinking about whether there would be opportunities to work with other COCs on advocacy and legislative relationships, things like that.
Yep. So COCs, definitely there are like COCs who have advocacy committees. In fact, the Florida Coalition in Homelessness, they have an advocacy committee. And I'm sure they would love Pinellas to have a representative join that. So certainly reach out to Leanne and ask to be able to join that. They would certainly appreciate that. There's going to be a Florida Coalition in Homelessness Day at the Capitol that they will do, and they'll have coordinated meetings with different members. Something that I send out through the coalition to everyone who receives my email, local legislative delegation meetings. So we send out the schedule, we send out talking points, kind of the do's and the don'ts at those. So from an organization standpoint, I would say that yes, there are similar COCs, but from a statewide coalition perspective, they have their own advocacy committee. They'd love for you to join them. They do their Tallahassee days. And then through that coalition, we send out information relating to the delegation meetings, the do's and the don'ts, legislative priorities, members that may be on that committee that would be important, as Anne Marie was mentioning earlier, where they reside as far as our priorities on what committee structure, et cetera.
Thank you. We did speak on, I know Anne Marie spoke at the Pinellas legislative delegation meeting, I think on behalf of the Area Agency on Aging, and I spoke on behalf of the COC here. But it was 2 minutes. That's what you mean about making sure we have talking points for our 2 minutes?
Yep, that's exactly right. And I can tell you as a former House staffer who I worked for a member, and we had 10 counties. While 2 minutes is completely unfair, you'd probably be there for a week if you just let people talk the whole time. But it is important, if for nothing else, for this reason. Well, I'll give you 2 reasons. One, they're seeing your face. Any interaction you can get with your local delegation, you build that over time, and eventually they'll get, I know that person. Where do I know them? Oh, yes, that's from the Pinellas COC. And you want that to happen with these members, right? Especially in Florida where there are term limits and we're constantly getting new members every 2 years. And so it's very important from that perspective. It's helpful certainly from a staff perspective too, to what are the issues? What do people care about? What are people taking the time out of their day to come and wait for 2 hours to be able to speak for 2 minutes, or 4 hours to speak for 2 minutes? Um, I'll also share with you a very successful story. I represent another organization, a group of public guardians, and they represent their court-appointed guardians for adults who do not have the financial means, mental capacity, or a willing family member to make their legal or medical decisions. So they're appointed a public guardian. And I had prepped our they're broken up into circuits. You're broken up into CoC, so they're the 15 judicial circuits across the state. And in 2 minutes, it just so happened that they were speaking to the then appropriations chair of the Senate, Rob Bradley, and we were pleading for funding at the time. Our return on investment is this. Here's the people who we represent. We are not receiving any recurring dollars from the state. And because of that and other advocacy, but because of the 2 minute speech, Rob Bradley got off behind the desk, went and met with my client and me on the side and said, what is it that you need? We need to fund your program. And that year he gave us $10 million recurring. We've seen that program now grow to over $30 million recurring. So not every delegation meeting is going to end that way, but if you're not there, you're not there, right? And it's important to have a presence and to show up. And if nothing else, after you've gone for 3 years in a row, they've said, wow, they've been here 3 years in a row. We need to give them something, right? Also, and lastly, and maybe most importantly, it gives you an opportunity to then ask your entire delegation, I'd like to schedule one-on-one meetings with you in your district office. I will be following up with your staff after this delegation meeting. That is really important because then you can say, spoke at the delegation meeting, discuss scheduling meetings one-on-one, will help you get in a little quicker.
Yeah.
I saw Anne Marie had a question about do we monitor federal funding? FCEH does. I do not because I'm just state lobbyist. I help where I can from a federal perspective, but the Leanne and the coalition are definitely more involved on the federal side than I am with Pinpoint. We're state and local here.
Yeah, it's specifically with what happened last week and
Right.
the pause and then the pause on the pause, but not really.
Yes.
But
we were working, we did work that issue. And we were trying to interpret what was right and what was wrong and what it meant and impact to programs and what that would look like. So to that extent, we were involved in helping decipher the information and get answers. But that's pretty much as deep as we go on that end, just simply because of where our relationships reside. We're here in
thank you.
Florida. Yep.
Thanks.
I think Aaron, want to finish this up here with a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And Brian, thank you so much for your presentation. Are you aware of any counties in the state that have actually tried to erect any temporary shelters under House Bill 1365? And if so, how they tried to use funding under the bill to do so?
So it's a great question. I am not aware yet of any counties that have implemented an encampment, to my knowledge. I believe what counties are doing, we're seeing this, I'm starting to see this more and more. Counties are actually starting to pass local ordinance prohibiting it because, as they say, whether they agree with the legislation or not, they need to comply with state law according to their county attorneys. And so what they're doing is passing local ordinances prohibiting public camping and sleeping in non-designated areas. I don't know that there is one state. There's certainly not a statewide approach. I don't think anyone's running to the encampment route. They're looking to see what can be done with existing resources and funding to address those who don't have shelter today. But I have not heard of anyone yet, and I could be wrong, but I've not heard of anyone yet building an encampment based on last year's legislation. Maybe something that resembles it, but because the law doesn't require one to be built. It just says, hey, if you're going to do something, here's an option, and if you do, by the way, you got to comply with these certain standards.
Of course. And that's been our COC's approach. And I think probably the prudent one according to the restrictions and the funding. So I was curious if anyone within the coalition, if you've heard of it and whether it's been successful at all. So that's thank you for that answer. It's a good anecdote.
Yeah, you bet. I think a lot of communities, as I'm sure your own is, are just trying to grapple with the law. What do we do? How do we implement it? October 1, the bill did go into effect. January 1 was with the civil penalties, so someone can sue, or a business can now sue as of January 1. So I know people are scrambling, and at the very least, and we said this last year in our testimony in committee, while we didn't agree with the legislation per se, we did agree with the fact that it shined a light on a problem, and there is a problem. There's too many that are unsheltered. I think what we all need to do to collectively together is decide, well, how do we best serve those who are unsheltered? And I think that's probably going to look different depending on community to community. But we at least appreciated the ability to have it opened up the door to have the conversation about the very individuals that we serve. So we look forward to continued conversations with that one.
Well, thank you very much. You've gone over your time that you generously gave to us. I really appreciate your expertise, and we certainly will have at least one member or more join with that group for advocacy on a statewide, and look forward to your updates as bills change daily almost.
Get
right?
ready. They're going to start
And,
flying and being filed. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
Tis the
really
season.
appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks for having me,
Thank you so much.
everybody. And lastly, just thank you for what you do. It's critically important, and it makes my job in Tallahassee easier when you have good success stories to tell, like Pinellas. So thank you. Appreciate you all.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. All right. So we've got quite a few. We've got at least 14 with some reading notes, maybe people or machines. But any follow-up commentary, anything that you found surprising or encouraging, anything anyone wants to add with just our group here, our advocacy group on that? Sam, I thought your question was particularly good about what other COCs are doing and how we can, operate as a collective and have a stronger voice. I think that's really important. And I know that wording and stuff can change pretty quickly. So if we can get on some kind of a listserv or information that comes out real regularly once they're in session with a call to action, and especially members who are on committees, those kinds of calls to action are important. Anne-Marie?
Yeah. So thank you so much for organizing, having Pinpoint do that presentation. I think that was really helpful to get that kind of very objective perspective from the Pinpoint results. They do really good work, and I have a lot of trust in what they say. I too agree with Sam that I think it'll be important. And maybe the HLA already participates in those advocacy calls at the statewide level. But since the CoC has an advocacy committee now, it makes sense to participate as well. I would like to just go back to, his point that they do like a one-page letter, which has the priorities. And they're usually bullet points if they're anything like they do for us. But it really provides a platform to reach out to the legislator so that he sees, Kathleen's name, Aaron's name at the bottom of this letter, if that's how, we decide to go. And I think that's important. And then I do think that there needs to be follow-up, especially once we know which legislators are on those committees. And it's going to be impossible to meet them if you don't go up to Tallahassee now, because they're in committee weeks. They just finished their special session last week. And even up in Tallahassee, you get maybe 10 minutes in between whatever other group that they are seeing. So I'm not sure that this year would be the right year to do that. But definitely I would recommend taking to the board, maybe a copy of the PowerPoint presentation he did as reference, and then a copy of the legislative priorities with a motion to have the board, send out that letter as our first advocacy initiative. Thanks.
Mhm.
Yeah, Maria, I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess I would say maybe even to your point about it not being the right year, I think that's probably true. Although I would also think if there are people from the committee or people from the CoC who are going to be in Tallahassee or who could be in Tallahassee during committee week, it's never too early to get our face in front of people, even if we aren't speaking in front of a committee. And that wouldn't need board approval. It would just be going there and saying, "Hey, I'm part of the Pinellas Continuum of Care. It's really important that we protect our citizens who are living unhoused in the budget process and in our deliberations." Keeping it general, but getting our faces familiar up there, I think, can be really helpful, even without specific content. But I do think that letter for an advocacy action item is a great idea.
Yeah, and I don't know if the CoC goes up for the legislative days, or if the local HLA has either. I know I won't be going up to Tallahassee this year, but I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, I've gone up with the Suncoast League of Cities when I was on Clearwater City Council. But the Suncoast League of Cities had a list of like 4 priorities. However, the Suncoast League of Cities, representing all of Pinellas and some of the other bordering counties, have always had housing initiatives as one of the priorities. So it was easy to talk about that. But and I could speak about my engagement with the CoC work too. But I think especially if Anne Marie has a relationship with Senator Hooper, I know Senator Hooper, and whether or not he meets with us, to be there at his office and leave a hand-delivered letter and or one pager, as Sam suggested, is important. I can definitely do that. This legislative session, go up there for that.
Yeah, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
And then depending on what bills drop and who the sponsors are, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Are we in support or not?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's pretty easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I would suggest, again, for next year, because we're way too late, is, that Suncoast League of Cities. I provided, I think one of the things in the consent packet was a list of all of the lobbyists that are in Pinellas County that are working for either the municipalities or the county. Next year, send those legislative priorities to them. So that when the municipalities and the counties are looking at what their legislative priorities are going to be, that they are aware of what the CoCs are. And of course, we have, members on the board.
We do. We do.
I'm thinking Clearwater, I'm thinking Pinellas, but then City of Largo.
Right, the county, all that.
Some of the other ones.
Right.
But I do think it's too late for this year because you want this to be tight. You want this to be focused, and we need to all be together on this. But I would suggest that for next year. But I do think this year there are some things that we can do, between now and March 7th. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking about, we have our priority populations, and, for us to be sharp and tight for next year, I think is a much more realistic goal for the state legislation. But what we can do is take this energy and intention and use it for the municipalities in the county that have a different budget, right? So they're going to be talking about their budget right now in the early spring, and then it'll be approved at 2 meetings in September. And so we need to, we need to articulate our priority populations, our numbers, and what we want to see in our county, in our cities. Yeah. So
I wonder too, this is sort of, I wonder if we could take the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness's priorities for this year as an advocacy committee, recommend them to the board to approve those priorities because they're already tight. They're already in a one-page format, assuming that they're not stupid or there's not some glaring problem that we disagree with in them. But I wonder if we might take some step to just sort of link that now, recommend it to the board for approval at the March board meeting, and then we'd have something that's approved by the board that's vetted by other folks in the field in our area who know what they're talking about as well, to sort of build on.
Yeah.
And then we could be more specific for next year with more locally tailored.
Right. That's what I meant. And I'm sorry if that wasn't clear to what I said earlier, but yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do we want to take a vote on that? Do we want to make a recommendation that that's what we're going to do to the board of directors? We can reach out, finalize any information from the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness, their one pager and asks, and bring it to the board of directors in March. You guys okay with that?
Yep.
For at least for a discussion, right? I mean, we don't see it right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that's going to be controversial.
No, I don't either. I don't either. Okay. We'll do that.
So who then's going to follow up? Is that Megan and Victoria? Because you have the contacts with Brian.
I'll send out a follow-up email with all of the information y'all have requested.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. That sounds good. All right. Anything else on our takeaways from this presentation by Mr. Cherry? Not seeing any hands. Am I missing hands? Anybody? All good? Okay. All right. So the next agenda item is follow-ups from our August 14th meeting. The list of Pinellas County municipality and lobbyists. So Anne Marie, you've got that all covered?
I did, and I shared that, and some of them might change next year. But again, this is kind of prospectively trying to build that consensus, that support to advocate for this issue.
Okay, great. And then I had the follow-up with our municipal planning agency. So this was with Forward Pinellas. And I met with Whit Blanton last week. And so Forward Pinellas is in charge of the Pinellas County Housing Compact. And so Whit had told me that they're planning another housing summit, and it'll be either late spring or early summer. They don't have a location yet. They're going to kind of send out a hold the date notice soon. But they have 9 different entities that have signed on so far out of our 24 in the county. So they have St. Pete, Clearwater, Largo, Pinellas Park, Oldsmar, Treasure Island, Gulfport, Pinellas County, and Forward Pinellas. And part of his feedback, again, we met in person, but this was a follow-up that he sent. But they also have a tactical team made up of staff from those local governments who are working with us with Forward Pinellas in this the housing compact, working with us to implement the countywide Advantage Housing Action Plan. Our focus right now is developing the Housing Regulatory Toolkit, which will provide all our local jurisdictions with best practices, model ordinances, and strategies to create housing that is more diverse and affordable. And then our goal is to have the Forward Pinellas Board approve the toolkit by mid-year. We are also planning to hold a countywide housing summit soon as we complete those projects and bring more attention to the housing compact. We will make a renewed push to sign on more partners. And, if you think about those municipalities and the county that I named, those are the big ones. I mean, we have tiny municipalities that absolutely, it'd be wonderful to have them sign on. But as far as a housing development in Bel Air Shores or Bel Air Bluffs or, Indian Rocks Beach or something, they just don't have the land for that. That's not really, but they can certainly support it. So that was the update from Whit. But Whit was the one who mentioned to me about an ADU bill that he thinks is going to be filed in Tallahassee as well. And, he just said he's watching something about that. But what he'll need support from people like us as they make a pitch for this regulatory toolkit of best practices at each municipality. It'd be like, we're in support of those kinds of things that are best practices, whether it's for mixed income, mixed use, or, any kind of housing, workforce, affordable housing that they're going to be working on. So that's my update from the Pinellas County Housing Compact.
I have a comment
Sure.
or question. So thanks so much, because I think that's an important group to know what we're doing. So the ADU bill, it's a positive thing, right? It's to allow.
Yes, we viewed it
Okay.
as an ADU. Yes, as a positive. Now,
Okay.
one thing that we talked about when we talked about it, so Clearwater, when I was on the council, we passed an ADU ordinance that allowed ADUs, and it just required that an owner live on the property, either in the ADU or the
Right.
main structure, because people get worried about short-term rentals for sure.
Yeah.
But what was saying, Dunedin had an ADU ordinance, and I don't know if it was in the works or passed. I think it's passed, but it meant you had to be related to the person in the building. So in the ADU or whatever, and it's just like, wow, that's a huge limitation,
Right. City of
and
Largo. Yeah, City of Largo, as part of its Housing for All work, just passed it at their December city commission meeting, an ADU bill. It sounds like it was similar to Clearwater in the sense that the owner of the main structure had to reside there again to thwart the possibility of Airbnb-ing it.
Yeah.
But that's good. That's good to know, because sometimes the state precludes people from doing things.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing Whit mentioned was the possibility of tying transportation dollars to a municipality that would sign on to the housing compact, which is fine. The housing compact doesn't have hard and fast deadlines or commitments. It's kind of light and aspirational. There isn't anything binding, but it's something, at least brings awareness and again, it would be a tool in our toolkit. It's not the most powerful tool, but it's something, to certainly be aware of. So that's my follow-up from our August 14th meeting. Any further questions on that regional planning meeting with Mr. Blanton? He's a good advocate to have. He really advocates for mass transit options, more transportation options, next to housing, workforce housing, next to employment, all that stuff. He's a good partner to have. Yeah. Okay. All good? Okay, we'll move on to our discussion of the proposed committee workflow. And we did, in looking at the notes, we did look at that last time. And I didn't know if anybody had any further comments, but what I did was, I'm reading Sam's comment here. But what I did was, before this advocacy committee meeting, I sent out an email to each CoC committee chair asking if they had anything they wanted to discuss or any data that they thought was important that they wanted the advocacy committee to discuss at all. And I didn't, nobody had anything at this moment. So any concerns with that proposed flow chart and feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do review data and system performance, but I don't think, and I think that the flow sheet that we had, the template for committees sharing information with other committees makes a lot of sense. But the concern DSP had was if it doesn't look like it's said here, but it almost felt like advocacy was also going to be reviewing data regularly, and we thought that might be redundant. So I think there are changes in the data, but they're not noticeable most of the time. We have massive disparities all the time. That hasn't changed in 5 years. We have little things that change every now and then. None of that would change our advocacy agenda. So just data informed is great. Data obsessed is not helpful.
Okay. I didn't think it would be obsessed. It'd be just more to use it to, yeah. And then as far as the proposed flow chart and the proposed purpose, all of that has been changed and approved, right, Megan and/or Victoria? Right, and we have our established committee and we have our chair and vice chair for our advocacy. All that's good. Just want to confirm that.
I know that I think it was the September last fall. August, that sounds right. Yes.
Yeah.
This committee was established. The board did approve that.
Yeah, and we've got that changed purpose, right? Because we're not we're using data and research to advocate to policymakers and funders. And good. Okay. All right. We our next agenda item, if you want to put that agenda up there, I just want to make sure because we had a little edit of it, but it should be a brief information on engaging with faith-based communities, right? Yeah. Workflow. Yes. Okay. And we're good on time. Fantastic. So it's been, I've mentioned this to a number of people about the need to engage faith-based communities in our area, especially with some of the focus on language and names of committees and what things do and all that. And I think that we have the potential to have real strong advocates and supporters in our faith-based community throughout our county. I've met with Pastor Bill Lasasso a few times since, probably 3 times since our August meeting. I've also met with a couple of different congregations that my husband and I go out and install LED lighting for them to help reduce their operational costs and have conversations with some of those church leaders. I have not yet reached out to FAST leadership, which was part of our notes, but I intend to do so just for some feedback about interest in getting involved with a CoC and what do they see as concerns with housing and our people who are struggling in Pinellas County. I know there are a number of them. Actually, my friend Roland is on this call today, and he and I are mentors at through the Pinellas County schools here in Clearwater, and he's dealing with the mentee who is homeless, and it's a challenge. And so, Roland, do you want to add anything about that, or you just want to listen more today? And Roland's part of a congregation that has helped a bit too, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's a gut-wrenching journey I've never been on before. I'll say that about it. And we do have a nonprofit at our church, the Uncommon Touch Ministries, which they've been very supportive in my trying to help this family. And it's definitely a worthy cause that we're working on. And I don't know, I would like to see more organizations similar to ours doing some additional things, I guess I'll say.
And more organizations, you mean more faith-based organizations?
Yes, more faith-based organizations. Right.
Okay. Is Mount Zion part of, they are part of FAST with Reverend Lee Hall Perkins, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And that would be
Go ahead. Okay. Any other feedback from members of our advocacy committee about the possibilities in engaging faith-based leaders in our work, or, fundraising to help, or, bridging wait list time, things like that? Has anybody ever thought of that? Or have any cautionary words, or think about this, or any feedback on?
Yeah, Chair Beckman, this is Sam. I had to switch devices, but I think from the church perspective, I think there are a couple. My one caution is that sometimes we think about the faith community having a lot of resources to bring to a operation like this, and often they do not. So that's a caution. I think the encouragement is Victoria and I have had a couple of conversations about volunteer opportunities and whether there would be an opportunity to centralize volunteer opportunities around serving our folks who are homeless. And I think there are a lot of congregations who would be really interested to plug into a platform that helped share volunteer opportunities. I think about my own congregation, Missio Dei. We don't really have a membership, but we have a ministry that a couple of churches plug into, and they come and serve regularly at our place. And I think there are a lot of churches that couldn't start something, but would love to participate. And as you build that relationship on the volunteering side, I think the tie-in to advocacy and potentially fundraising would flow from that. But I think the most likely starting place is coordinating volunteer opportunities.
Great. Great. That sounds good. That sounds good. One of the things that when we talk about, all right, so when we talk about volunteer opportunities, some of the challenges I think of are, so this young woman that Roland and I have been working with most recently, she kind of mirrors another young woman that I got an email from about 6 weeks ago. This woman actually emailed somebody on the Clearwater Council and they forwarded it to me, but both of them are young women, probably early to mid 20s, have very young children, don't have housing. I would assume that maybe they were with a family member for a while and that, ran its course or something, and now they're finding themselves unhoused with a child. So to have them be able to, get some schooling or education for a job, find some daycare, in addition to like VPK, which is not, to my understanding, 5 days a week, as long as possible, let alone VPK having to be within their geographical area. And I know the one woman they don't have a vehicle. And so it's all those kinds of challenges. And if we have volunteers that may be able to help with childcare or, drive somebody somewhere, I worry, one of the things I get concerned about is like liability and a level 2 screening, because I know, I've got to have a level 2 screening in order to walk through the halls alone at a school, going to a classroom or something. So, I wonder about that kind of thing when we talk about a volunteer. Go ahead, Victoria. Whoops, there you go.
I'm off mute. Sorry about that, everybody. It's only 2025. Sam is right. We have talked about this quite a bit, and I'm happy to say that the CoC, we do offer organizations the opportunity right now to send us volunteer or opportunities that we can forward on to the community. But as Sam mentioned, this is not receiving the level of use or engagement from providers or from the community that we really want it to. And there are definitely opportunities to expand that and to make this something that really benefits kids that need service hours, organizations that need additional assistance, and, organizations that are looking for opportunities to give back and things like that. There are definitely a lot of opportunities for this. So one of the things that we do right now is we specifically ask in our volunteer applications, for instance, if people have a level 2 background screening. And then in the request to submit that volunteer opportunity, we would ask folks to let us know if they need that information. We are also able to share the volunteer application with the organization. So there are definitely, this is a really, really long answer to your question, and I apologize for that, but there are definitely some of our partners that do require level 2 background screenings where you absolutely cannot volunteer there unless you have that. We do also have opportunities outside of just, for instance, the point in time count, because obviously you don't need a level 2 background screening for that, but there are year-round opportunities that don't require that kind of restriction or background check. There are year-round opportunities that are exclusively for adults or that are available to kids as well. And there are also one-off opportunities that we could come up with as a group that we just haven't done yet. So there are a lot of different ways to approach this, but absolutely some locations require stricter volunteer backgrounds and things like that. And that is one of the things that we are happy to try and connect folks with if we can. So I'm really excited really excited about the opportunity to make that more of a usable thing, and really welcome any sort of feedback or ideas or anything like that. And I think that I've answered this question and rambled on for long enough. And I know Anne-Marie has her hand up, so I'll be quiet now.
All good.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, thank you. So I think this is a bigger issue than advocacy. I think that engaging the faith-based community is actually a strategic partnership goal potentially for the CoC. And I think it requires kind of like a work group to really look at all of the elements, including volunteering, advocacy, resource development, outreach, fundraising, because I do think that there are so many organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques that would potentially be very interested in doing something together, but not necessarily advocacy related, if that makes sense.
Yep. I think you're,
yeah. And as chair of the board, I mean, I would imagine that you could call a work group that, included Metropolitan Ministries, Catholic Charities. Sam, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on your church.
Go ahead.
Universalist Methodist, yeah. And then some of the others, there's so
yeah.
I'm not
the
saying
Unitarian group, yeah.
I'm not saying advocacy doesn't play a role, but I think this is so much. I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we limited this solely to looking at it from an advocacy perspective. Thank you.
I think you make phenomenal points. I appreciate that. I always, appreciate your perspective. Yeah, I think it belongs in a strategic plan for sure. Yeah. Aaron, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to say that I love that perspective because I think it's both. I think someone on this committee can be in charge of advocating to go to new faith-based organizations. That is advocacy in a way, in addition to this strategic partnership, but that would be part of that plan. So that was awesome. So thank you for that.
Lottie,
Giving you a, you know, a thing in that as I raise my hand. So thank you.
thank you. Lottie?
Hi, these are all great ideas. I'm also a part of Baycare, St. Anthony's Faith Community Nurses,
Mhm.
and the nurses belong to about 50 to 60 different faith communities, churches, et cetera,
Mhm.
in Pinellas County. So, and myself being a faith community nurse for 15 years now, I have somewhat of a relationship with several churches in the Clearwater area and also St. Petersburg. So I would love to help out in this initiative.
Thank you. Good. I think we'll make it part of our strategic plan. Again, we've been in need of a strategic plan. The CoC has for quite some time, and it's one of the things that is top of my list to, have that completed. And, along with a gaps analysis, it's to show where our needs are and get us all rowing in the same direction. And working together. Yeah. Well, thank you for that feedback. I'm going to just flip through my screen and make sure I'm not missing anyone. Anyone have their hand up that I'm missing for feedback on faith-based organizations? Okay. All right. Anything else that anyone would like to discuss or bring up? Anyone have great ideas or anything?
I'm sorry, my hand is up again.
Okay, thank you. Great.
So
I don't see you, but go ahead. Go ahead,
I
Anne-Marie.
really want to get off this call, but
No.
I did just want to ask about the federal funding because I did see the email that either Aaron or Victoria sent out to a couple of us. I think it just went to a couple of us. I'm not sure. And then, of course, we were all following what was happening because potentially so many of our organizations and communities that we serve can be just disastrously affected by what's happening. And we know that some organizations in our area have had their funding cut because they serve refugees and immigrants. And so I just wanted to get a sense if there was anything that the CoC or the HLA had heard about that what HUD was doing, if HUD was looking at any of the grants that it distributes that you might get directly that could be affected. And then the last thing, I promise, really, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity for me and some of my team members to participate in the pit count last week. It was a moving experience, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do it for so many reasons. So thank you.
Aaron, you want to answer that, or Victoria on her question about the HLA and the email sent out?
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, Anne-Marie, the answer is we are all being told to keep checking. And that's the best answer. So our access to funding has never, since it's been turned back on, has not stopped. We are being told to operate as if they are going to continue, keep submitting requests, keep applying for grants, keep assuming it's status quo. None of us feel good that it's just the OMB memo that was rescinded and not the order. So we are not hearing anything from a CoC managing or lead agency or collaborative applicant from our, ears to the ground that anyone else isn't hearing, other than there could be another memo tomorrow, or this order could just be in effect because that's saving some face that the order stays in effect and the memo never comes back. But funding is accessible. We have access to all funds that we did before until further notice. But that's a good question, and thank you. And also thank you for saying about Pitt. It was also an incredibly rewarding experience. And I want to shout out to staff who's on this call and not on this call, and everyone else, not just my staff that participated. So thank you, everyone.
It was a great, well, we were lucky that the weather cooperated, but it was a Herculean effort. So we do appreciate all that. Just one little bit, if for anyone who was at our last board of directors meeting. So we had an applicant for the at-large seat, Anna Limanova. She was the woman who's from Ukraine, a pediatrician who runs a refugee, housed refugee place in Pinellas Park. And after that meeting, I went and met with her and toured that facility. So she has said that they are all legal refugees here for resettlement. And, you know, to my knowledge, all that funding was suspended. So I don't know how she is doing. I put her in touch with some attorneys and different resources. There are, you know, there's federal and state refugee offices, but it's something to be aware of as we, you know, stay in touch with her.
Actually, Kathleen, I'm so sorry.
Go
I'll
ahead.
let you finish for a second.
No, that's all.
We actually do want to be very careful within the continuum to talk to all of our providers and funders about language being used. So I would check websites. We of course would provide housing for anyone in our community, but be careful about language of refugees, about any DEI inclusion in terms of the programs we offer. I would again recommend, and we should think about sending out some, and again, this is well, we're in open discussion and the question was asked. So we're getting a little, it's important that it wouldn't surprise me if any language that's used on any website that's not directly attached could come next. So I would recommend anyone within our continuum to start looking at that now. And we might need to think about how to address that, Kathleen.
Well, and it might be a memo that you send out to our members with that guidance.
Right.
The HLA could do that.
And I don't know if there's anything in your contracts. Like I know the contracts that we have with our contracted providers.
Sure.
If they're referencing our organization on their website, we have right of approval.
Sure.
I don't know if you have that in your contracts with your contracted agencies.
Well, we do, and thankfully the DEI stuff was written out 4 years ago or 8 years ago, a lot of it, and didn't come back. And so because now our contracts are a lot already complying with some of that, but again, I would just say a lot of people double check and be careful. Yeah, good point.
All right. Anything else from anyone on our meeting today? So we have an action that we're going to take, which is, a follow-up. I'm going to meet with some FAST people just to understand more about what they're seeing and what their level engagement might be for later on. We need to get our strategic plan done as a CoC to be able to work off of that. And then the other thing is we're going to recommend to our board of directors for this year for state legislation to work with the Florida Housing Coalition's list of priority legislation and, chime in and support their work. Anything else? And did I miss anything? Okay. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for organizing the meeting, Victoria, Megan, and Aaron, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.